Alright, so a while back in one of my lives I told a story about how my dad would go to the bar and sit next to this Vietnam vet. They'd chop it up per usual, but on this particular day, my dad would sit down next to him and he'd look at him and say, "Damn, Kent, I'm telling you, we'd have been a force to be reckoned with in Vietnam. You'd have been on my team too." "Well, what do you mean? Why is that?" my dad would say. This gentleman would go on to say, "I always recruited soldiers with vivid eyes like yours. Didn't matter what color, from blue to brown, but they just had to be bright. Guys with bright eyes like yours were always really good guys, kind, decent to others. But when it came time to battle, they would turn a switch and reach a focus like nothing I'd ever seen. They would almost become machine-like in the way they fought, like a sort of hyper-focus, if you will. And this has been heard of throughout history." Then I get this message from one of my fans on Insta. "On a point you made regarding people with bright eyes, my father has very bright blue eyes. He earned over 90 combat points and was awarded more bronze and silver stars than Audie Murphy as a young Marine fighting in the World War II Pacific. He spoke once of the phenomena that would overcome him on the battlefield. He called it the quickening. When it fell upon him like a cloud. He could move in real time through a slow motion or frozen battlefield. He could feel his enemies approaching from great distances, allowing him enough time to warn his leaders and even set up ambushes. In researching family genealogy, I noted a Comanche bloodline within 4 generations of his birth. This bloodline would pull him towards nature, while the European would pull him towards industrial. A follower of mine's grandfather lived next to the 7 luminaries in Mexico. When he would go visit from Cali, he'd tell him about his ancestors. Some of the stories are crazy. I've been lucky enough he's actually been sharing them with me and telling me that I can share them with you. So I have been, and this is stuff you definitely want to hear. His grandfather stated that there's been 3 great wars on Earth. Wars of good against evil. He would state that the evil beings wanted to take Earth, and that during these times the world was highly technologically advanced, and many of the people were of a higher consciousness, including his ancestors, which I have reason to believe may have been the original Egyptians. Many years before the Third War of Good versus Evil, they knew it was coming. So the good higher beings of love and light, which his people would refer to as the Sky People, tasked his ancestors with traveling the globe and warning other human factions. So they would travel to China, Australia, Russia, Europe, all over the globe. So as they got to each location, they would warn the people of the impending battle. They would build relationships with them and teach them of love and light and how to harness the Earth's energy. They did this by building pyramids. Using sacred geometry taught to them by the Sky People, they were able to build them mimicking the star constellations. They did this so at certain times throughout the year, when they lined up with their star constellation, they would harness that said star's energy. Not only that, they taught them how to harness the Earth's energy in themselves, their being. This made the people of the world in these times very powerful. They built such strong relationships at the locations that they went to, sometimes they would end up living there, or the people would end up coming back with them. This is why I believe they could have been the ancient Egyptians. They were a seafaring group that traveled the globe building pyramids. Makes sense. And what a lot of people don't know is the pyramids are actually earthquake proof, and if a nuclear blast occurs nearby, they'll sustain. Shortly after, around 10,000 BC, the battle would take place with the evil alien faction. They would hide the women and children in deep underground caverns that had seawater in them. Here, they would be protected by the allied sea creatures, which I believe could have been mermaids. While their warriors, known as Mexicanos, would join the good alien beings and fight this grave enemy. They would use super advanced technological weapons that could literally incinerate their enemy to a pile of ashes. They had super speed and agility. They were faster than anyone on the battlefield. They could also move things with their mind. They would pick up large boulders and toss them, smashing the evil beings. He would also say that at this time, man could talk to animals, and they were part of the battle too. Even Bigfoot, he would claim that Bigfoot and man once had a long-standing relationship, that Bigfoot has been around for millennia, and that they are here to protect the portals to inner Earth. So the battle would rage for 1,000 years, eventually good prevailing. But right after, the Ice Age would take place, due to nuclear fallout. This is the legendary tale of Beowulf and Grendel. It begins with Danish warrior Hrothgar, who lived sometime in 6th century AD. Hrothgar had just led his people to victory in one of the greatest wars in Danish history. So as a result, he was crowned king. One of the first things he did with his newfound power and wealth was build a great hall in a marshland near the Lake of the Monsters. As soon as he had it built, the hall known as Heorot would house many gatherings with hundreds of people in celebration of the new great king. It is said that his music would ring throughout the marshland, and they would play all night. But little did Hrothgar know that when he moved into the marshland, there was somebody already inhabiting it. A beast that stood 15 feet tall and had the strength of 100 men. His name was Grendel, and he was a savage monster. He would consume anybody that stepped in his path. He lived there for centuries undisturbed until the new arrogant king moved in on his territory. At the time, the king had no idea, but his loud music was disturbing Grendel and driving him insane. He would become full of rage and eventually snap. It was a gloomy night, and Hrothgar and his people were partying as usual, when suddenly, even over the loud music, they hear a fierce roar. The music stops, and everybody in the hall grows quiet. Then another loud roar. Then out of nowhere, they hear a large bang on the great doors. Then another. And the third time, it blasts open, and there stands Grendel with fire in his eyes. He says nothing and begins tearing apart the Danish people, one by one. The warriors in the group try to fight back, but they stand little chance against the great beast. The scene was ugly, as he took 60 lives that night. Hrothgar sat there at first, stunned. He'd clean up the mess and call it a night, but not for very long. The very next day, he would begin the festivities even earlier. And once again, while they were partying, they hear a fierce roar. This time, they tried to reinforce the door with large pieces of lumber, but it was no match for the giant Grendel. He would blast the door open with great ferocity, consuming even more people. And after he'd leave, the arrogant king would clean up and begin partying the very next day. This took place for days on end, until finally the king grew tired of it. That's when he'd summon Beowulf. Hrothgar had known Beowulf since he was a kid, and he recently made a name for himself as a great warrior by slaying large sea monsters. So he'd send one of his soldiers, and just a few days later, Beowulf would arrive. The very night he arrived, you guessed it, they began festivities, but this time, they had Beowulf. Beowulf was known by the people as the greatest hero throughout the land, and he knew it, so before the battle, he shed his armor and his weapon. He explained to the people that the fight wouldn't be fair, as Grendel was no warrior, because he had no weapon. So I recently watched a Joe Rogan talk show on the Chimera. A lot of people don't know this, but the Chimera actually date back to ancient times. So my question is, what ancient civilization was advanced enough to make these creatures? The US actually did this back in the 1920s in Florida. They created human-chimp crosses. Other countries have as well. So if we're doing it, that means that an ancient civilization had to be advanced enough to do it as well. The question is, which one? My guess would be most likely the ones that created the pyramids. So could this be why God decided to flood the earth? Because the ancient civilizations started playing God? It's hard to say. Or were they doing this even before the Great Flood? Were they doing this 10 to 12,000 years ago, before the asteroids hit Earth? Now it is said that the labs today aren't letting them go past the embryonic stage. But in the 1920s, out of Florida, they did. They actually let them get full grown. The other question is, were they doing this for combat? Were they trying to create these super strong, fast, smart hybrids to fight wars in place of mankind? And I find it hard to believe they've actually stopped doing this. I believe they're still doing this in labs, maybe in deep underground military bases or somewhere. But it is said that in the 1920s, the US actually ended up eliminating all of the specimens that they created. And why they did this is simply mind-blowing. It was reported that these hybrids were so in tune with their animal self, as animals would be. They would be in tune with self, meaning their instincts for survival, their role in nature. And on top of that, they had human intelligence. So the people in the lab actually began to fear them. And the reason being is because they actually were so smart that they seemed to have telekinesis. And not that they could actually read your thoughts, but they were so good at reading your body language and your mannerisms that they could predict your next move. And yes, that is a form of telekinesis. We use it every day with our animals at home. Based on their actions, we can actually read their thoughts. Imagine it. Ape-like human hybrids that could read your next move and read your thoughts. Lethal. And it makes one wonder, has this happened before in history? The Planet of the Apes scenario? I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but man, Most movies we have today, predictive programming, they don't come from nothing. Now remember, this is for entertainment purposes only, may or may not be true. Was Marilyn Munroe's untimely death the result of her wanting to expose aliens to Hollywood? Many would say yes, and it was due to the information given to her by Robert and John Kennedy. The actress and model would lose her life on August 5th, 1962, from an apparent drug overdose. They would find her in her Los Angeles home. She was just 36 years old. But it wouldn't take long before her closest friends and family said no way. There was actually a cover-up going on. In his most recent documentary, Unacknowledged, ufologist Stephen Greer would draw the same conclusion. Released back in 2017, Greer claims to have received a top-secret tape recording of a conversation between Robert Kennedy and Marilyn Munroe. And the date written on this recording was just 2 days before Marilyn Monroe's death. The title of the document he received was called Project Moondust, which is the phrase the CIA would use when talking about UFOs. Mentioned in the recording was Marilyn Monroe's meeting with President John F. Kennedy at a secret base where the things from outer space were. Many speculate that the spaceships he took her to see were the ones that crashed in Roswell in 1947. In other words, most likely he took her to Area 51. It has been said that the reasoning behind her death was that she wanted to expose what she saw to Hollywood. She was threatening this because both Robert and John decided it was better to stop dating her. The Secrets of the Underground Tunnels, Part 1. With the declassification of ground-penetrating radar back in 2010, even though they've been using it since the 70s, there's staggering new data that show there's a labyrinth of complex tunnels that span across the entire Earth. The following discoveries were made back in 2003. Namely, the US government, along with other superpowers, would find that there's actually 4 primary tunnels spanning for thousands of miles. And off those main tunnels, subtunnels that lead you deeper into the core of the Earth. They would state that the deeper you go, the bigger the megalithic structures would get. And in these tunnels, you would find rooms, huge rooms, with massive stone tables that were made for people much larger than us. What scientists would refer to as the projection room would contain all of the Earth's history, from her natural processes to the species inhabiting her. And these events could be replayed visually. Even a table you can perform holographic experiments. The type of experiments? Mixing DNA. You could virtually mix the DNA of any 2 species on Earth, and it would provide a holographic image of what they would look like. They would also discover that these rooms are over 50,000 years old, and that they're all connected to each other by some form of energy. This same energy also protected the room, and if one of them activated, all 4 would. They've also figured out each of the room's locations. Of the 4, the first one is located near the Egyptian Sphinx. The next one is located in Iraq, in underground tunnels somewhere in the city of Baghdad. The next one is Mount Kailash in Tibet, obviously a pyramid. Then finally, Buseji Mountains in Romania, where it's said that they have another Egyptian Sphinx. They would go on to say that the deeper tunnels would lead to a secret world under the Gobi Plateau in Mongolia. But it didn't stop there. They claimed the tunnels would lead to another secret world, below Antarctica. In the end, this connects to the German Tibet expedition in World War II, Hollow Earth, the all-seeing eye above the Egyptian pyramid, and much more. In 2002, the Pentagon was running many geodesic and military programs using satellites based on ground-penetrating radar technologies. And what they would find was absolutely amazing. The satellites would pick up a weird-shaped anomaly in the Buseji Mountains in Romania. They would also reveal that the tunnel was blocked in 2 different spots by the same energy. Basically, energy shields. The first one was at the beginning of the tunnel, blocking the entrance. The second one would be a huge dome-shaped barrier at the middle of the mountain. It's believed that Germans would be the first to encounter these energies in World War II. If it didn't kill them, it would send them out running with massive migraines. Some would even have heart attacks. Signor Massini, the leader of this expedition, would conclude that something important must be there. This is why the Titanic never really sank. In 1898, a man named Morgan Robertson wrote The Wreck of the Titan. The book is about a massive luxury liner deemed unsinkable that was going too fast in the North Atlantic, hit an iceberg, and sank. Wait a second. The month it sank was April, and almost all the passengers died due to lack of lifeboats. Sound oddly familiar? Almost 14 years after Robertson published that book, the Titanic would sink in April after hitting an iceberg, and most would die due to lack of lifeboats. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention, just 2 years after the Titanic sank, the author of Wreck of the Titan would die from poisoning. On top of that, Morgan would establish the Federal Reserve Bank just a year later. Because all three of his competitors died on the Titanic. He was supposed to be on it, but canceled at the last minute, along with his friend Milton Hershey, who would later form the Hershey Empire. Oh, don't worry, there's more. Alright, so in the early 1900s, J.P. Morgan was part of the British White Star Line Company. They built cruise liners, but back then the competition was stiff. Their main rival, the Cunard Steamship Company, another British corporation. At the time, they held the record for the world's largest passenger ship. So J.P. Morgan and the British White Star Line Company were losing the battle. As a result, they would enter into the giant ship war and built what the White Star Line would call the Olympic-class ships. The Olympic was built first and was considered the lead of the three. They also had the Titanic and the Britannic. But on just its fifth voyage, the captain would make a wrong turn, hitting a British military ship. The massive ship would barely limp back to shore. Then, at a later trial, it was deemed the White Star Line was responsible for the incident. This would result in economic disaster for J.P. Morgan. Not only was he getting no insurance check, he had to pay for repairs and was sued. So what would he do? Take the newly built second ship, the Titanic, and switch it with the Olympic after repainting both ships. Then intentionally sink the Olympic, but make it look like to everybody that the Titanic sank, when in all actuality, it was brand new, sitting comfortably in the bay. Insurance fraud 101, fam. Oh, and by the way, this was all confirmed by an elderly gentleman on his deathbed. He was quoted as saying, "The Olympic, not the Titanic, sank that day." But he didn't say anything in order to protect him and his family. So J.P. Morgan would intentionally sink the ship, which was the Olympic, not the Titanic, so he could collect insurance money and eliminate opposition to the Federal Reserve Bank. The competition being Jacob Astor, the richest man in the world at the time, and he was a longtime friend of Nikola Tesla. J.P. Morgan backed Thomas Edison, Isa Strauss, and Benjamin Guggenheim, who were all opposers of a Federal Reserve Bank. I gotta say, that's an elaborate scheme, fam. But it's plausible, and honestly, I believe it. J.P. Morgan would go on to earn the title of the richest man in the world, and back the U.S. in the Industrial Revolution. What up, my people? I hope you all enjoy these mashups. I just kind of throw them together randomly. I know it's a lot of information to take in. I try to keep it more 3-minute videos than 1 minute, because that would be probably overwhelming. But yeah, I'm going to just keep doing this. I guess let me know in the comments if you vibe with them. Either way, I'm going to post them. But still, I'm just curious if you do. And I hope y'all are doing well. I probably will go live later, or I plan on making another video. I haven't decided yet. But either way, going to be some more content later on. Hope y'all are having a wonderful day. And we will see you guys later. I'm out.